Hello, welcome to the Team Fortress 2 map review. I'm Herbis, and today I'll be showcasing and reviewing some of the maps that are currently in development on the TF2Maps.net site. This is from the game day on Thursday the 13th of December 2012, and we have 6 maps, 3 of which are King of the Hill, and 3 of which are CP. So we'll start first with King of the Hill Snowside B2 by Dice Cube. This is the second beta of the map. It's in sort of a snowy mountainside industrial base kind of environment, which does look quite nice for the second beta, which is the stage at the moment. When I played it, it had quite a nice simplistic layout, which meant it was easy to find your way around as pretty much any class. And for the most part, it was nicely balanced. I saw some people saying that it could have more class-specific balance tweaks, but in general, it was pretty well balanced for everyone. It looks nice already for the stage that it's at. With all the snow environment's been nicely realised, and the tall industrial buildings with bright windows work quite well, I think. It has, obviously, as it's on the sort of snowy cliffside, it's got a nice death pit, which is a plus for pyros, because you could just shut people off there. And there are a lot of open spaces, which means it's good for snipers, though that can be both a good and a bad thing. Because I know the sniper decks on either side of the point were quite powerful when we were playing it. At the moment, I'm sure this will be rectified soon, it only has one health kit, and it's a small health kit, and it's in the elevator at the bottom end of the map. And obviously this makes it quite difficult, especially if you're faced with a pyro and you don't have any medics and you don't have any dispensers. It's quite difficult to put yourself out unless you milk or piss yourself. But I'm sure that's easily rectified just by placing more health kits in. There weren't that many pickups when we were playing, but that's something to keep in mind for later. Because all the spawn doors open out onto the same kind of open area, it means that you can spawn camp fairly easily as a demo or an engineer for sentry. If you get one up in that area, it's very easy to control all 3 doors at once, so that might be something to change as well. In front of the spawn, there is a sort of an intermediate team-coloured building, and it has quite a low roof, and it means that you can, if you're a demo with a sticky jumper or a soldier with a rocket jumper, you can jump over that building and just like bomb down on the point and blast apart anyone who's there, which makes it quite difficult to continue capturing the point if you're already there. It might be useful to have some kind of cover on the point or make that building a bit larger to kind of reduce that. There's also the main industrial building behind the point. Has quite a large open room inside, and it seems like it's lacking use a little bit because there's not too much in there, so I don't know whether that might be something to change, maybe to make that area more interesting. But overall, it was pretty fun to play for pretty much any class. I like the height variations, the point being on its own kind of plinth in the middle makes it interesting for when you try to, if you're capturing the point, it gives you a little bit of an advantage over those people who are coming towards it. Obviously, the more height variation in TF2, the more interesting the maps generally are. The only thing I might say is maybe make the routes a little more interesting, because at the moment it's either out of spawn and turn left and go across, or out of spawn and turn right and go across, and then you're at the control point already. So it might be maybe utilise the main kind of industrial building thing and make that a bit more interesting, give people maybe height advantages there, just to add a little bit more gameplay variation. So next we can move on to CP Pinnacle A1 by Tarry H. Sruman. This is the first alpha, so obviously expect there to be design changes, possibly quite large ones depending on how the feedback goes. It's a staged CP map like Dust Bowl, which means it has, well, this one has 2 stages as opposed to 3, and I quite like stage maps myself. They're sort of, I think of them as the campaigns of TF2 because they go on for the longest and you kind of have a feel of progression. So I'm quite looking forward to this one when it gets finished. I thought the general consensus was the point areas were quite well designed for both the attackers and the defenders. So the attackers had good routes onto the point, good height variations to utilise, and there was good defensive space for sentries and things like that. On the routes between points, there was also lots of opportunity for sort of cover and for tactical gameplay, because I know there was, when we were playing, there was a staircase going up to the very first point that people like to hide sentries under, and there were a lot of rocks and things like that present on the routes between the points, which, yeah, made it quite interesting and gave you cover and gave you options to launch attacks on people as they were coming past and things like that. And it does make quite a good use of height. There are a lot of height differences, and obviously that helps the gameplay. The main thing that people were finding was that it was quite large and the routes weren't particularly concentrated. There wasn't a strong sense of combat being channeled down a particular kind of route. So that might be something to look at. I found it sometimes difficult to know where to go because it was quite open, and I mean there were signs, but it just didn't feel like the way that the level was laid out and the geometry was pointing me towards where I needed to go. And the walk times as well are quite long between the points. I don't know how they compare to Dust Bowl, but it did take quite a while to get from place to place sometimes. Generally, I found the control points, especially on stage 1, the control point near Blue Spawn was very close, because you could just walk out one door from Blue and then be in the building basically, which means that you could probably put that control point a bit further away. And also the second one on the first stage was a bit far away from Red Spawn, so if you kind of shifted that whole middle thing upwards a little bit, that might fix that, because it just felt a little bit out of balance in that respect. I know on stage 2, when you come out of the Blue Spawn, right opposite it, basically straight on, there was a large building with not very much in it. It just seemed a little bit useless. I kind of expected the control point to be in there, because as you're coming out of the Blue Spawn on stage 2, you go up the hill, and it's sort of pointing you towards that building. That building's in the skyline. So it feels like there should be some kind of objective there, but actually the point is to the left. And if you walk into that building, there may be some health or ammo in there. There's not very much, and it's quite large. So I thought maybe making better use of that building, or moving the control point there or something like that, might help in that respect. Also, people were saying the points captured very fast, which I probably agree with, and possibly linking into that, it seemed to mean that the map was slightly in favour of blue rather than red, apart from when you got to the final point, where red had a fairly decent time holding out. So overall, I think it was a good starting concept for an A1. Main thing is that the routes need to be refined, and it needs to be made a little bit less open, so that you have more idea of where you're going, basically. Next is King of the Hill Dustplant A4 by Coelacan. It was a King of the Hill map supposedly themed around a Dust Bowl, and again it's in its early alpha, so expect design changes as we go along. What I thought, it had an interesting point design, because the point was linked to two buildings basically, and on a 45-degree angle to what seemed to be the grid in relation to the other buildings. So it was an interesting point design as opposed to being just like square, and it was raised up, so it meant that if you were capturing the point, you had like a sight line down onto the, anyone who was on the lower ground, and that worked quite well. And also behind the point there were a lot of routes to utilise, especially in that building. There were sort of, as far as I know, 4 routes onto the point itself. One small one from behind, 2 main corridors either side, and a bridge. So that made it quite interesting when you were trying to either capture or defend the point, because you've got a lot of directions to watch out for enemies from, which I found was quite good, because it made it interesting, and it means that you have to watch your back while you're there. There's also some quite nice geometry. I know the point itself had the large Manco sign above it, and that I thought looked quite good. Though following on from that, there were, again, another couple of buildings. There was one that I went into which had a small ammo pack, and it was a very large room, and it just didn't seem like it had very much point to it. So it might be best to rework some of the buildings and rethink them a little bit to make it kind of more interesting. The other main problem, I think, with the map, and that people were pointing out, was that the sight lines towards the point from each team's side of the map are enormous. You could stand all the way back on one side and scope down the channel and basically have a very powerful sight line with a sniper to pick off anyone who's on the point. So that would be one thing to change, I think, because it made snipers able to sort of dominate the point very easily. It was also, again, a map that was quite open in a lot of areas, and so it took a long time to traverse from the spawn to the point, for example, if you were sort of a normal class who didn't have mobility like Soldier or Doorman. So scaling that down would be a good thing. The point seemed easy to hold sometimes for the people who got it, because there are so many directions in which you can attack it. That means that it's quite easy to hold for the people who have it, and quite difficult to attack for those who want to take it, because the other team already has a presence there. And apart from the point being raised up on architecture, the rest of the map is quite flat. So that would be a good thing to change as well. So overall, it is the point I quite liked in general. Just make it easier to capture if you're launching an attack on it. The main problem is the openness and the sniper lines, so fixing that will be a priority, and also making the architecture a little bit more interesting on some of the other buildings would be good too. Right, the next map is an interesting one, because it turns out it's my map, which is CP Snowbound A3, third alpha now. Played it 2 previous times on different game days. And because it's my own map, I won't really be able to do a very good critique of it because I have what I like to call author's immunity, where because I made the map and I know everything about what's going on, I'm not able to look at it from the perspective of an outsider player who's never come across it before. So I'll just give you a brief overview of the design points that I had in mind when I was building it. It was supposed to be designed around a sort of a snowy military mountain base held by red. And blue was invading the base, and you get further inside in the sort of inward spiral in the similar to Dust Bowl. And it was also slightly inspired off, I don't know if any of you have played Just Cause 2, but the military bases they have in the sort of the snowy mountains there were a bit of an inspiration. And it seems to have been fairly well received. There have been a number of major changes to it over the alphas that I've put out. The 2 main things at the moment seem to be that the final point, stage 3.2, is fairly similar to Dust Bowl, and it's also quite easy for red to hold, which makes it difficult for blue to capture the end point. I know the last point is supposed to be quite a difficult one to push through, but it's still undergoing tweaking really. And the other thing was that a lot of people have said that, especially on stages 2 and 3, the first points are quite easily captured by blue. So those are the other 2 things that I'd like to rectify in the map design. Apart from that, it seems to have got a fairly good reception. Obviously I can't critique it very well, being the author of it myself, but if you're in any of the game days where it's being played, check it out, let me know what you think. So, next map. On to King of the Hill Hippies Alpha by Brock Stonefist, who is someone I know very well. This was originally called KOTH Wood, which I made numerous jokes about when downloading new versions of the map. And it's since been reworked a little bit, water added in the centre, more kind of routes put out to the point. I've been present on a number of the previous tests, not TF2 Map tests, just informal ones with friends. And I quite enjoy playing on it, but again that gives me a little bit of an insider's point of view as opposed to an outsider's point of view, which is why the TF2 Map test is very useful. So in the pros it has a lot of interesting buildings and routes. They may not be the most convincing realistic building designs, but they do. I quite like the routes and the way that the height variations are used. There's a lot of buildings around the point with sort of balconies and things so that you can launch attacks down onto the control point, and different sort of side routes to utilise as spies and things like that, and vantage points for snipers. The only thing is it seems to be quite easy for one team to push forward to the enemy spawn once they've captured the first point and then proceed to kind of spawn camp. It's quite easy to control the area around the spawn because there's not a nicely defined arena. It seems to be more of a cluster of buildings together rather than the traditional kind of TF2 layout of have an arena and have a number of entrances to it. Which means that, yeah, it's quite easy for a team to kind of dominate that area and difficult for then the team who spawns there to push out. The map itself is not the biggest of maps, it's quite narrow, which means there's not a terrific amount of room for flanking. A lot of routes to the point are all parallel to each other down the kind of long direction of the map, and so you don't get many that are perpendicular to them going sideways, so that might be a thing to look into. Also, as I kind of said before, the buildings could be more cohesive. They look, at the moment, like they're lacking I know it's only an alpha, but it looks like they're kind of lacking a grounding in the TF2 universe in the way that we think of it, like buildings. It doesn't look like they have much function. They look more like a collection of mapping blocks that you can use to get to the point rather than physical buildings. So that will be a good thing to work on. So yeah, overall, having tested this map a number of times myself in the informal playtests, I didn't quite enjoy playing it, but I think there does need to be more focus on the arenas. Because at the moment, although it's fairly easy to find your way through, that's basically because you just keep moving forwards. And if the flow was more clearly defined with arenas and entrances and exits, I think it would work better. And at the moment, a lot of the buildings are quite close together. That does make it nice to be able to jump between them as scouts and mobile classes. But it might be better to define the gameplay areas better than that. So now on to the last of the maps that we tried is CP Edifice A2 by PDT. This is a 3 control point map, like Gravel Pit, where the first 2 points are available for capture, and once you've captured both of them, the third point then opens up. The whole architecture on the point, even though it's an alpha, is quite nice. It's made use of the sort of grey 50% reflectivity dev textures, and then combined them with the team colours, mostly red, and it actually looks quite nice. Even though it's not detailed at all yet, it does look quite nice. I've seen people in the map thread saying, oh, please don't detail it, it's a really nice looking alpha. So that was, it makes it a nice one to play. And again, I'm pleased with a lot of the maps having a lot of height changes and variations, because that makes it nice and interesting. And the routes between A and B and those and C seem well planned and well thought out, so that's good. The main thing, if anyone was present when we were playing this yesterday evening, was that it does look an awful lot like Gravel Pit. I know the author said it was quite inspired by Gravel Pit, but the word Gravel Pit was being mentioned an awful lot in the voice chat when we were playing through the map. So I don't know the best way really in which to rectify that, but people were feeling like it needed to have its aesthetic changed to look a little less like Gravel Pit with different structures in it. The height differences on C are very large as well, especially walking from the main level of balcony onto the dirt floor at the bottom. You can take a fair amount of fall damage just doing that, and it also makes it difficult for blue players to be able to attack the point really in any way. There's also the back of the point facing the red spawn that doesn't have very much cover to it like Gravel Pit does, so it makes it very easy for red players to jump up onto the point and intercept when blue players are trying to capture it. Although that did make for quite chaotic gameplay on that final point, which I quite enjoyed, so it'll be looking for a trade-off between that and red easily controlling the point. The health and ammo placement as well could be slightly better, I think. For what I saw, there were a lot of small health kits and small ammo packs scattered around the map, and some of them were floating a couple of feet in the air as well. It just looked a little bit odd, and I feel like it would be better if, rather than scattering small ones everywhere, you condense them more into higher capacity packs like medium health kits and medium or full ammo packs, and that would concentrate the gameplay more around one area rather than scattering it all over the arena. So overall it does seem to play nicely, although I think maybe A and B should be slightly easier to defend and C a bit easier to attack, because it was very easy for red to defend that. And also the main problem of it being quite a lot like Gravel Pit. I know it might be difficult to reduce the likeness to Gravel Pit without reworking the whole map, but it is fairly similar, and it just feels like it could be a little bit more different, especially in the things like the tunnels between the points where they've got the concrete struts and things like that. It does look an awful lot like the architecture from Gravel Pit, so that would be something to look at. And so that's pretty much it. Those are the 6 maps that we played this game day. Leave a comment if you want to, maybe you played the maps, maybe you even made one of the maps, and let us know what you think. I hope it was enjoyable. I will try and be back next week for the next game day to do another review. Until then, I will see you guys later.